Good evening, everyone. Today is April 20th, 2021. And this evening we are going to be walking up Kino Ole Street. It's 77 degrees. It is right at about 6:39 p.m. So we're basically right at sunset. It's officially starting to warm up here. For the longest time, the forecast high was always about 75 degrees here. I would say throughout the entire winter, like November, December, January, February, and March. And even April, up until just these past few days. Where the forecast is now showing highs in the 80s, like maybe 81, 82, 83 degrees. Which here, since it's so humid, usually feels more like 84, 85, 86 degrees. That is definitely one thing. There's a local gym. I just found out BJ Penn is actually an MMA fighter. He's actually an MMA fighter. He has belts. He's won belts and everything. And he has gyms here on this island and gyms in Oahu on the main island. Right now I'm smelling some serious barbecue. Like maybe someone's making some jerk chicken. Here we've got the flowers across from the flower shop. Really hoping that within the next couple months I'll be able to get a solid moped so I can really start showing everyone around the rest of the island. Local sports bar here, and you can still see into the ocean from here. That's Hilo Bay in the distance. Got the other flower shop here. How's it? But yeah, I definitely feel the humidity. I definitely feel the humidity already. It's but my understanding is that it doesn't get terribly hot here. It gets maybe 90 at worst. And I think people consider that to be really uncomfortable here. But we'll see. Now we got some apartments. One thing I will say that's a little bit different out here is that on the mainland, how's it? One of the big things, so today is April 20th, and one of the big things that I feel is not quite as present here is mainland politics. Before moving here, I'd lived in a few different parts of Georgia on the mainland, and then before Georgia, I lived in New York City, which is pretty much where I grew up. And last year, how's it? And last year, I'm sorry, man. And last year, excuse me, I had to throw something away. And last year, during during the height of the protests and stuff, even in small towns, there were still people marching, and there was still a lot of unrest, a lot of public unrest, even in smaller towns, and people definitely there's definitely a lot of opinionated folks about just a lot of the politics going on with gun violence, police brutality, the whole nine. And so today, after the verdict, well, basically people around the nation were poised to begin protesting and rallying for whatever the verdict was going to be for George Floyd's death. And I know that if I was back, back in New York, if I were back there, it would have been a lot more apparent to me, walking to work or taking cabs places or walking downtown. There's no way that I wouldn't have seen people organizing around this issue. And in Georgia, I feel like it would be the same. Even if things weren't going on in my town specifically, I probably would still hear about things going on a few towns over. But here, that's one thing that I feel like is unique to Hawaii, that the mainland politics are I don't feel the presence of mainland politics. I feel like people here are mostly concerned with local politics and politics surrounding things that impact the folks here. And so that's just something that I thought was worth taking note of. I didn't hear anything about the case today here. Anywhere in town, at work, anything like that, because it's not so much of a local issue. And speaking of those kinds of politics, having been here maybe about 6 months now, I will say that so far I don't really feel I haven't really felt any real racism here. I haven't really felt ostracized by police or singled out in stores. Singled out in shopping centers, or I don't know, or have people sort of make any sort of derisive comments about my ethnicity. I mean, there's really not too many popolos here, which is what Hawaiians call black folks here, but within Hawaiian ethnic groups, within ethnic groups that are sort of native to the Hawaiian Islands, I believe there is sort of an internal prejudice. So the main groups are those of Portuguese descent, those of Japanese descent, those of ethnic Hawaiian or Samoan descent, and those of Filipino descent. And to my knowledge, the from what I've heard, the Japanese kind of stick to themselves. So for example, if there's Japanese, then they'll marry other Japanese and kind of like, or maybe live around other Japanese, or conduct business with other Japanese, or form partnerships and relationships, whereas the other ethnic groups mix. How's it? Whereas the other ethnic groups intermingle more. This is my understanding so far. And then if someone happens to be upset at someone for something, if they're able to tell what their ethnicity is by looking at them, then from what I understand, it occasionally will be used in derogatory means, in the heat of an argument or something like that, who does this Portuguese so and so think they are, cutting me off in traffic, something like that, Portuguese being what Hawaiians refer to as the people of Portuguese descent out here. And then I feel like it's fairly common I feel like it's fairly common for Hawaiians to call white people haoles, which is a sort of abbreviated version of the words haole, which means no breath, and that's sort of has a little bit derogatory undertones. But I should say it can have derogatory undertones. That's what I'll put it that way. It can have derogatory undertones, but it doesn't always. It just depends on how it's used. The way that it's been explained to me is that if someone says you freaking haole, then it's definitely derogatory for white folks here. But if they just say it in passing, then it's not derogatory. Whenever I first moved here, I worked at a market, and I had a Hawaiian woman tell me that there was a white woman in the next aisle who needed help, who needed some assistance, and the way that she said it was, that like, haole lady in the next aisle needs some help, and that as a mainlander when I hear people talk like that, it definitely rings as being a little bit politically incorrect, but I think there's a lot of